very happy.
Mr. President, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you for your perspective at this important moment. We appreciate it. And our thoughts and our prayers are with the families of these brave servicemen and women that lost their lives, severely injured, and the civilians and their families, and those trapped behind enemy lines, and those allies that are pretty much targeted for death. That's all the time we have left. Let not your hearts be troubled. Troubled times. Laura Ingraham takes it away. Have a good night.
I'm Laura Ingraham, and this is a Fox News alert. Another blow to Joe Biden moments ago by a 6-3 vote at the Supreme Court. They struck down the administration's latest eviction ban, that eviction moratorium. We have more on that later with Mark Meadows. But first, we start in Afghanistan, where heartbreak and fury, that is what Americans across the nation are feeling tonight after suicide blasts at the Kabul airport killed 12 U.S. Marines, 1 Navy medic, and it leaves more than a dozen wounded. Now, it's been 2 decades of war since 9/11, leaving behind deep physical and emotional pain for many of the hundreds of thousands who bravely served here. And many, of course, remember on multiple tours. And as we finally wrap up U.S. military operations in Afghanistan, our enemies are gleefully exploiting our president's ineptitude. And the results, as we saw today, are deadly. Tonight, we're going to bring you straight analysis of this rapidly deteriorating situation. We have all the military and political shockwaves covered. Perspective from Ed Byers, retired Navy SEAL, Master Chief. He was the recipient of the Medal of Honor for rescuing an American hostage from the Taliban. Along with Afghanistan vets Congressman Waltz, Green, and Mast. And for the political fallout, Newt Gingrich and Mark Meadows. But first, Biden's body bags. That's the focus of tonight's angle. For the past week, Biden and his team have spun over and over that the evacuation was going well. Well, today we saw the truth. This was all total crap. This is a catastrophe. And if you and your team, Mr. President, can't handle this mission, why should we trust you to handle any mission? Our enemies know that we're being led by a band of incompetents. And none of them are shaking in their boots from this Biden promise.
To those who carried out this attack, know this: we will not forgive. We will not forget. We will hunt you down and make you pay.
The fact is, President Biden and his hand-picked military leaders have failed the American people. They failed to bring and build an Afghan army to withstand the Taliban. They failed to organize a withdrawal that didn't devolve into total chaos. And they failed to first extract Americans still in harm's way, and instead, they prioritized Afghan nationals. As far as we know, hundreds of Americans still remain in Afghanistan. How many more men and women in uniform might die because Blinken, Milley, and the rest have no idea what they're doing? These young men and women joined the military to serve and protect their country. But now they're forced to serve under leaders who couldn't run a school crosswalk. All Americans should have been withdrawn weeks ago, not in the last moments. So once they created chaos all around the airport, it created an impossible situation, one that allowed ISIS militants to murder our soldiers. Just like Joe Biden created a magnet for illegals and the cartels at the southern border, his plan created a magnet for terrorists at the airport in Kabul.
We expect those attacks to continue, and we're doing everything we can to be prepared for those attacks. That includes reaching out to the Taliban, who are actually providing the outer security cordon around the airfield, to make sure they know what we expect them to do to protect us.
Is he even listening to how insane he sounds? He's the head of CENTCOM. We're relying on the people who we've been at war with for the last 20 years for protection and safe passage? Now we're letting them play TSA for us in Kabul? Of course, that's not even the worst part. It turns out that the Biden administration actually gave their Taliban counterparts a list of Americans in country and a list of Afghans okayed for evacuation.
There have been occasions when our military has contacted their military counterparts in the Taliban and said, we want you to let that bus or that group through. I can't tell you with any certitude that there's actually been a list of names. I know there may have been, but I know of no circumstance. It doesn't mean it didn't exist. We're just counting on their self-interest to continue to generate their activities. And it's in their self-interest that we leave when we said, and that we get as many people out as we can.
It's actually scarier hearing that the second time around, by the way. I only heard it once. That was the second time. It's terrifying. I cannot believe this is happening in the United States of America. Encouraging thousands of desperate Afghanis to flock to that airport, of course, just an idiotic endeavor. We're seeing it play out at our southern border. Desperate migrants, they're rushing in. And it's just pain and suffering caused along the way. These are purely political calculations that Biden's team has made. They wanted millions of migrants at the southern border. They got them. And now they want hundreds of thousands of Afghan refugees here in the United States, and we're on track to get that number as well. My friends, they cannot be allowed to continue this. This cannot be allowed to happen. Joe Biden has proved himself to be completely incompetent. A single American serviceman or woman should not die under the regime that they've created. The military leaders, from Milley to the head of Central Command to what we've seen in our Secretary of Defense, Lloyd Austin, none of them should be still in their positions. None of them. Accountability is something we need in Washington, D.C. And I remember earlier this week we heard Biden and his team saying, oh, now's not the time, Anthony Blinken, now's not the time to ask these questions. No, now is the time to ask these questions. Now is the time to demand accountability. And tonight we're going to do that. We have a great lineup of guests, men who've served in Afghanistan, men who know how the struggle for our men and women in uniform goes on a daily basis. They're not just talking about it, they did it. So joining me first are three House lawmakers who served in Afghanistan: Florida Congressman Mike Waltz, a Green Beret, Brian Mast, a bomb disposal expert, and Tennessee Congressman Mark Green, Special Ops. Congressman Waltz, let's start with you. Was this is kind of a gimme question, was this all avoidable today? And if so, why have we not seen any resignations?
Well, Laura, it's worth noting that the same team that's around, Biden is the same team that was around Obama, right? The same ones that were responsible for Benghazi, that were responsible for the rise of ISIS, that were responsible for the Bergdahl trade, have now created this mess. And Biden was there, too. And here's where we are. And now he has us in a position because he pulled out too fast, too soon, let the Afghan army collapse, took no action when it was happening, shut down our main air base. Now we have this false choice of either stay and continue to suffer attacks in an indefensible position in Kabul airport, or go and leave Americans behind and create the largest mass hostage situation in American history. It'll make 1979 look like child's play. That's what this team, and that's where Biden has gotten us, on top of 13 dead Marines.
Yeah. Congressman Mast, I want to go to you here. What I was stunned by, about like the 5,000 things that I was stunned by today, and I am really mad, heartbroken. That's obvious, but I am so, I'm just livid about how this has been able to happen to our troops. Joe Biden gets up there and he praises the leadership from the Central Command. Well, we're all unanimous on the decisions we made. If they're all unanimous on the decisions we made to leave those troops as sitting ducks there, then we have even bigger problems on our hands. Congressman.
Yeah, all of us have been in briefings, and we can't give you everything in those briefings by any means, but we can say they were anything but unanimous. And we can look at their words and analyze this. He said, we won't be intimidated. America won't be intimidated. them being intimidated was what brought all of this about from beginning to end. Being intimidated into a red line of a date, being intimidated into not following through on their red lines, such as any interruption of our operations will be met with a swift response. Remember Biden saying that? I would call the Taliban cordon around the airport an interruption, them not letting people through an interruption, taking our embassy and Bagram Air Base, that would be considered interruption, stealing our equipment, that would be an interruption. Zero response. And I just say this about him. His words are empty. We know that. His head is empty and his heart is empty, and it's costing our friends' lives.
Congressman Green, we have 13 American families. The larger American family, obviously, is grieving, but we think of the 13 American families, all of their friends, all of their fellow service members who are grieving tonight. And yet right. Joe Biden actually says that Bagram, when they look back, well, we didn't really need Bagram Air Base. Watch.
I ask for their best military judgment. What would be the most efficient way to accomplish the mission? They concluded, the military, that Bagram was not much value added, that it was much wiser to focus on Kabul. And so I followed that recommendation.
Is it just me, or was Joe Biden speaking at like 3 paces too slow? It's too slow today. It was weird. It was just, he comes across as weird, like he's totally disconnected from the content of what he's saying. But Congressman Green, given all your experience, how critical of a mistake was it for us to abandon Bagram Air Base?
Well, thanks for having us on, Laura. It was a huge mistake, one of the biggest mistakes in our nation's military history. But it was Joe Biden who made that decision. I know for a fact that the military advised him not to leave Bagram. He said, we're going to downsize to 600 Marines, and the leadership told him, we can't hold Bagram with 600 Marines. He said, I don't care. Go to 600. He arbitrarily picked a number out of the sky, and they couldn't hold that base with 600, so they collapsed to Kabul. This is Joe Biden and his incompetence that made that decision, and that decision is what cost those lives today. The perimeter around that base is a street wide. That's it. But out at Bagram, you had kilometers of range that you could see the enemy coming, but not when it's just a street in the middle of an urban area. It's a horrible decision. It's 100% Joe Biden's. And that's not the first lie this guy has told, or I should say he's totally disconnected from the truth. Many, many other lies, and it just, he needs to step down, he needs to resign, or the cabinet needs to do something.
Hey, Laura, can I just jump in there on that?
Yeah,
on that Bagram point, because we were just briefed by the military yesterday on the Armed Services Committee that when we went back in to evacuate the embassy, they were once again presented Joe Biden with the option of taking Bagram. And he once again didn't choose to do so. So on the one hand, he didn't listen about shutting it down too fast. By the way, 5,000 hardened ISIS, Al-Qaeda, and Taliban prisoners are now on the loose. And then he didn't listen when they had to go back in to evacuate our embassy after the collapse of Kabul. And now he's tying the hands of our special forces who are chomping at the bit to go out into the city and outside of the city to get our Americans that are stranded. He won't let them do that either. Their hands are being tied. So this is just incompetence, and it's outrageous.
Congressman Mast, I have to get you in on this, because when I hear the President of the United States and earlier General McKenzie, the head of Central Command, talking about how, well, we're essentially relying on the good graces of the Taliban to get our Americans out of there. Look, this is your field, not mine. But given what we know they are capable of, how are those words even coming out of their mouths? I feel like I'm living in some kind of alternative reality here. But maybe you know this. I don't. So set me straight if I'm wrong.
What person didn't say? Come again? Did you say we're doing the people we've been hunting? for the last 20 years, the people that we've been exchanging fire with, the people we've seen stone their women and their men, the people we've seen rape women, rape young girls, rape young boys, those are the people that you're saying are going to have our back on the way out. Those are the ones that you're relying on. Everybody scratched their head and said, excuse me, the people that are now, quote unquote, have the most sophisticated military weaponry, shoulder-fired rocket launchers, surface-to-air assets, mortars, rounds, you name it. Those are the ones. That's who you're talking about. We all had a collective exact response that you just questioned. You're doing what? And it made no sense to one person on the face of this earth.
Congressman Green, on the issue of continuing our troop presence there, given what we saw and the carnage that we saw today, how is this situation going to get any better? I mean, again, I'm going back to CENTCOM, all the money we spent on CENTCOM, all the personnel, all the expertise. And the general says, yeah, we expect more of these attacks. So are troops just going to be sitting ducks, target practice for the terrorists, or are we going to bring in firepower to do something about this?
Well, I certainly hope they do bring in the firepower. They got to push that perimeter out to where they have actual fields of fire and fields of vision to see an enemy when it's coming. They can't just sit in the middle of that city and expect to know what the enemy's doing. I mean, they have to push that perimeter out. And then they have to defend it. And they can do that by sending those special forces out, just like, Congressman Walz mentioned. Right now, they're tying their hands. So they're not out in that city looking for the enemy, finding the enemy, pushing the enemy away. There's no buffer zone at all. So until they do that, yeah, we're going to continue to see this. And it's unacceptable. It should never happen.
Congressman Walz, we've seen all the heartbreaking video of our Marines holding up little infants and water bottles. That's not our military's role. As heartbreaking as it is, as awful as it is it also not the case that withdrawing from any conflict, especially one that we weren't victorious in, it was always going to be a mess? Not this messy, but people were going to be left behind. Is that not the case, to play devil's advocate here?
Well, there's lots of different ways that it could have been done better, Laura. Set aside the debate of continuing with a small presence of special forces and intel, which I believe we are going to have to do one way or another, because one thing the intel is clear on is that al-Qaeda is coming back, and al-Qaeda intends to hit the United States again. And al-Qaeda and the Taliban are married at the hip. But if you decide to withdraw, there's a lot better ways to do it. You don't yank everything out at once. In one fell swoop, we took the Afghan Army's logistics support, maintenance support, intelligence support, and their air support in the middle of the fighting season and announced to the world a date that we were going to do it by. There are ways to do it gradually, to do it where it's not such of a shock to the Afghan Army, and
but
do
not
it where
with
you
these
don't
guys.
announce to the enemy.
Congressman, I'm sorry to interject here, but Congressman Mass, here's my problem with all of this, is that we have people in charge. Our troops are relying on competence to lead them. We have people in charge who, again, I wouldn't trust to do security in an elementary school. And we're going to have them plan a mission where they're going to go door to door to get Americans, or the women that the people at NBC say helped us in a translation. I mean, I'm sorry, I don't trust the leadership. So until we have a consensus, political consensus in our country to go back in there and essentially declare war all over again with new leadership, military leadership, Congressman asked, I mean, are we going to sacrifice another U.S. service member under this leadership? The troops are great. The leaders are terrible.
I pray to God, as I'm sure you do, not one more life, not one more limb, not one more injury. What you're asking is, we have no strategic objectives here. They have optical objectives. We know that Joe Biden wanted to get out by 9/11 so he could have a celebration. that ended up costing lives. We know that they didn't want it to appear as a combat operations. That was one of the first things their press team said. No, it's not a combat operation, which is putting people's lives at risk when it's all optics. They're not meeting strategic objectives, and you can't do that if you don't have something that you have to meet. We're going to eliminate the Taliban. We're going to eliminate Al-Qaeda. We're going to eliminate ISIS.
Right. Well,
we're going to make sure that our southern border.
We've been doing this for 20 years.
But if you're not meeting those, then there is no point.
20 years, Congressman Green, 20 years, and they're trying to still spin this as, we got them on their heels, or the Taliban are going to help us, or we're going to get everyone out by, I mean, they're continuing to spin this today. To listen to this, the general in charge of our Central Command, I as a civilian, was horrified today. I was horrified by what I heard.
I was really upset at the tone. I mean, it was almost as if
like
they were
glib
flippant.
almost.
I mean, especially from the CENTCOM commander. I was very disappointed in that. Now, I'll tell you, I think the president is interjecting himself way too much in the military decision-making here, and I pin most of the blame of this on him. But that press conference today was embarrassing for the military leadership.
Oh my God.
I mean, they were so tone-deaf. I mean, we're talking 13 dead Americans, and they acted like it was some kind of a statistical data crunch. Infuriating.
I have to say that is that's actually a very clinical way of describing it. But that's how it came off to me. And of course, Joe Biden's son suffered, and reading the Bible. And we need to hear solutions. We don't need to hear a walk down memory lane by Joe Biden. I mean,
Laura,
we need solutions. Yes.
Laura,
final thought.
These have probably been the easiest press conferences for Joe Biden anytime, because all he has to do is say the opposite of what's going on in Afghanistan or in the world. That's what they're telling. Just say the opposite of what's actually happening.
Great point.
This can't be our country, but it is. And it's time for Congress to step up. And I hope all of you continue to have an oversight role and demand replace this military leadership. Our soldiers and our airmen, our reservists, our Navy, everyone's suffering as a result. Gentlemen, thank you. And is Biden setting the stage for a massive hostage crisis by giving the names of these Americans to the Taliban? Well, someone who is the recipient of the Medal of Honor for a daring rescue mission in Afghanistan weighs in next. Stay there. America is streaming with firsthand experience with extracting hostages in Afghanistan. He's retired Navy SEAL Master Chief Edward Byers. He's the recipient of the Congressional Medal of Honor for that rescue of an American doctor from the Taliban back in 2012. And Ed joins me now. Ed, first of all, thank you for your service, for being here tonight. Your take on this situation, just as you're witnessing this unfold, especially when we know, Ed, there are still hundreds of Americans on the ground in Afghanistan.
Yeah, thanks, Laura. First and foremost, the nation's in mourning. Today pierced the heart of our country, and large part because this year is an important year of anniversaries. We're on the eve of the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We just came off the 10-year anniversary of capturing and killing bin Laden, and just a few weeks ago, we came off the 10-year anniversary of the downing of Extortion 17, which was the single biggest loss of life in special operations history. 30 Americans and a military working dog were killed on that helicopter on August 6, 2011. And 10 years later, we now have 13 brave service men, 12 Marines, 1 corpsman. And this was tragic and completely avoidable. I think as Americans,
explain how, Edward. Edward, if you don't mind, I'm sorry to interrupt, but how specifically could this have been avoided? And then, assuming our troops are going to be asked under this leadership to go in and try to pull these Americans out, how dangerous would that be?
Hey, we've been at this, far too long, and we know this environment far too well. We have units designed to tackle this exact problem set. You have the 82nd Airborne out of Fort Bragg. and you have the Ranger Regiment. You know, the 82nd Airborne is designed to handle contingencies crisis around the world within 18 hours. There could be multiple C-17s going over there right now with those units and securing this airfield. If we look back in history, and we look back to 1983 in Grenada, in Operation Urgent Fury, where SEAL Team 4 and the 1st Ranger Bat out of Savannah, Georgia, went in to take Port Salinas Airport. The Ranger battalions, Ranger regiments are designed to do exactly this type of thing. When we bring the people in, they secure these airfields, they start pushing out rings of security, and then we start bringing back people the way we know how. We use force, overwhelming violence of action, and that's how we take this back and show that we are Americans and we have the greatest fighting force in the history of the world.
Are you confident, Ed, under this military leadership, that that is possible given what we've seen just in the past 10 days at that airport and what our troops have been asked to do in the 10 days with, you know, right now, even the CENTCOM general says, oh, this is going to keep happening. The attacks on the airport are going to keep happening.
Well, what I know for a fact is that if given the ability to go do the job that we know how to do, we wouldn't be in this situation to begin with. We would have been over with this war a long time ago. But the military has always been hamstrung by politicians. We've always been trying to play patty cake in an environment where you have to abide by different rules. War is brutal, it's violent, and if the military was just given the authorities to go do their job, there are a tremendous amount of resources that can be brought to bear that for sure could execute and complete this mission.
Ed, finally, you've obviously seen the Taliban up close and personal. You dealt with them. Rescuing that American doctor was the main reason you were the recipient of the Medal of Honor as a Navy SEAL. Should we be relying on them for safe passage of Americans in Afghanistan?
I think that's absolutely ridiculous that we would be relying on people that we've been fighting against for the past 20 years to provide a safe passage. What we should be doing is showing our force of who we are, definitely not relying on them to provide safe passage to Americans. You see where it got us, right here. The Haqqani network that's providing security right now, he was a mentor to bin Laden. So we're relying on people that are providing security for our forces that literally mentored bin Laden. It's absolute insanity.
Right before the anniversary, Ed, of 9/11. This is unbelievable. Exactly. Ed, I can think of fewer people that I would rather have spoken to tonight. Thank you so much, and we'll check back with you next week. And now I want to bring in retired Brigadier General Don Bolduc, who's been involved in hostage rescues. He's also running as the Senate as a Republican in New Hampshire for the Senate. General, what needs to happen right now? You just heard from a former Navy SEAL. He said we're capable of doing this, but the idea that we're giving lists of names to the Taliban? And the media, by the way, didn't get around to asking that question until about 4 questions in today.
No, well, thank you, Laura, for having me on, and thanks for all you do. First of all, this is a complete, the only word that comes to mind is incompetence from start to right now. I came out last week saying what we needed to do. We needed to go in there with overwhelming force, secure all the airfields in Afghanistan, and shorten the lines of operation, open up the corridors, have special operations.